Late November, 2007. Cold wind whispered through the pines of Black Pine Ridge, a stretch of high wilderness above Millfield, Virginia. A red pickup climbed the narrow trail, its engine echoing through the fog. Mark Dalton sat behind the wheel, hands rough, eyes steady. 47 years old, a mechanic everyone in town relied on. He fixed their engines, never asked for help with his own. Each winter, when deer season came, he disappeared into the woods. No phones, no noise, just the forest and the quiet. That was his peace. On the porch of their small home, his wife Sarah Dalton packed the same box she had every year. Thermos of coffee, canned beans, jerky and wax paper. It was their small ritual before every trip. "Back before Sunday?" she asked. Mark gave a half smile. "Same as always." He lifted the last bundle, closed the tailgate, and kissed her cheek. The pickup rolled into the fog. Taillights vanished behind a curtain of gray. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. By 2:30 that afternoon, Mark turned off Route 117, the road cutting through the pine slopes. He hummed quietly, an old habit when driving alone. At mile marker 71, a rusted sign pointed left. Forest Access 12. He slowed, tires crunching over gravel, then turned onto a dirt track swallowed by trees. He parked where the road ended, a small clearing under dripping branches. No signal, no houses, no sound but water trickling somewhere downhill. The Seiko on his wrist read 2:44 p.m. He slid it into his jacket pocket. Then something stopped him. A sound, metal scraping against stone. He froze, eyes searching the trees. Silence. Then again, faint, distant, like a hinge twisting in the dark. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of wet iron. Mark hesitated, hand brushing his rifle case. But he didn't take it. He stepped forward instead, toward the sound, boots pressing damp leaves. 2 steps. Then, nothing. The forest closed behind him. When Sunday passed and Mark hadn't returned, Sarah didn't panic. He'd stayed out overnight before, especially when the weather was mild. But by Monday noon, worry turned to dread. She called the Ashwell County Sheriff's Office. "I'm not saying he's lost," she told the dispatcher. "I'm saying he'd never just not come home." Deputy Cole Ramsey led the first search team up the ridge. They followed her directions until the forest opened. And there it was, Mark's red pickup, parked perfectly straight in the clearing. Doors locked, windows up, keys sitting neatly on the driver's seat. Ramsey circled the truck, frowning. In the truck bed, a rolled sleeping bag, a pack of food, and a Winchester rifle. Safety still on. No one leaves their gear behind if they plan to camp. The ground around the vehicle was firm. Only one set of footprints, Mark's 2 steps toward the tree line. Then gone. No drag marks. No animal prints. No signs of a struggle. It was as if the woods had swallowed him whole. The first search grid was small, barely a mile around the truck. 8 people walked shoulder to shoulder, calling his name. Their voices vanished into fog. By dusk, nothing. No broken branches, no scent. Just the sound of wind and the slow creak of trees. Tuesday morning, 12 more joined deputies and local volunteers. The radius doubled. Every ridge, every stream, every ravine checked. By the 3rd day, a K-9 team from Franklin County arrived. 2 German shepherds sniffed around the truck door. They caught a faint scent and pulled forward, noses low. 200 yards in, both stopped, circling, whining. The handler frowned. The scent just ends. The woods went quiet again. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By week's end, 30 people were searching the ridge. Locals brought food to the command post. Flyers with Mark's face covered every store window in Millfield. Sarah came out every day. She stood near the deputies, listening, silent. "He wouldn't get lost here," she said. "He's hunted this ridge since before we met. With me one." They checked everything, abandoned cabins, old mines, even 2 collapsed barns from the 1,950 seconds. Still, nothing. No blood, no clothing, no broken gear. A state helicopter circled overhead with thermal imaging. Everyone gathered around the monitor. No heat signatures. No campfires. Just cold. Just trees. The official report later said, "No evidence of foul play." But in his notebook, Deputy Ramsey scribbled something else. "Truck untouched. Rifle left. Keys visible. Not lost. Something else. Winter came hard. Snow sealed the trails and froze the creek solid. Black Pine Ridge went silent again. But Sarah didn't stop. Every weekend, she drove back, parked where the deputies once had. She'd walk the same narrow trails, flashlight cutting through the dark. She marked each path on her folded map, one by one. Neighbors told her it was dangerous. "If I don't look," she said, "who will?" The words stayed with them long after she left. By March, thaw came. Snow melted into mud. Streams whispered again. Deputies ran one last sweep before closing the case. Nothing. Sarah folded her map, circled a new section, and kept walking. Raindrops from melting snow ticked like a clock above her. Spring bled into summer. Flyers peeled off the windows downtown. People stopped asking. In Ashwell County, missing person folders filled another drawer marked unresolved. Mark's case sat among them, quiet, cold, forgotten. Except by one woman. Every weekend, she drove up that ridge, sat in her car, and stared into the forest. Wind moved through the pines like breathing. And somewhere deep beyond the clearing, half buried under leaves, a length of rope lay frayed and dark, waiting for the next thaw to tell its story. 7 years would pass before the forest spoke again. But on that first winter night, standing by her window, Sarah still swore she heard something from the ridge. Not a voice, not a sound she could name, just a low hum, carried by the wind, like metal dragging against stone, the same sound Mark had heard before he vanished. She turned off the light, and the house fell silent, except for the faint ticking of a watch, frozen at 2:44 p.m. Winter thawed, and with it, the search for Mark Dalton dissolved into memory. Deputies packed up the tents. Report sheets slid into drawers marked closed pending new evidence. Sarah stood in the clearing alone. Snowmelt dripped from the branches like a metronome. She looked at the empty truck bed, the imprint of tires still frozen in the dirt. "Where are you, Mark?" she whispered. No answer. Only wind. In town, time moved forward. Engines broke, were fixed, and broke again. The auto shop Mark once ran now sat quiet, its bay door locked with a heavy chain. People talked less. The missing man faded into rumor. Some said he left on purpose. Others said the ridge took him. Sarah didn't argue. She stopped attending church. She stopped answering calls. Her life folded inward, into maps, into the smell of pine. Every Friday, she filled the gas tank, drove north toward the ridge. Locals started calling her the woman with the flashlight. She didn't care. By early 2008, the sheriff's office had moved on. 2 new missing person cases filled the board. Mark's name was just a yellowing photo pinned to the edge. Deputy Ramsey left for another county. His note, something else remained in the file. No one ever asked what he meant. Spring storms came. Thunder rolled over the ridge like distant gunfire. Floodwaters swept down the slopes, carrying mud, sticks, and secrets. Sarah was there every weekend, boots sinking into wet earth. She traced every trail with a pencil. Blue for searched, red for next. Her notebook grew thicker. That summer, a fire swept through the lower slopes of Black Pine Ridge. 100 acres burned, mostly brush, saplings, and old logging paths. Smoke turned the sky a dull orange. After the fire, forest crews searched for flare-ups. They found bones, small and brittle. Animal, they said. Sarah came to see for herself. The ash stuck to her shoes, black against the pale mud. She knelt, hands digging through the soot. Nothing. No cloth. No sign of him. A park ranger placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, maybe it's time." She didn't look up. It's never time. Later that year, she sold their house in Millfield. Too many empty rooms. Too many ghosts. She moved closer to her daughter in Roanoke. But every other weekend, she still drove north. Her old map, folded into quarters, never left the glove box. The odometer passed 100,000 miles. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. In 2009, Sarah hired a private investigator. Paul Mercer, retired police, 58, caffeine for blood. He'd worked missing persons before, thought he'd seen everything. He spent 3 weeks retracing the official search logs, interviewed deputies, studied weather patterns, terrain maps, soil conditions. When he met Sarah at a diner on Main Street, He set his folder on the table, half empty. If he wanted to vanish, he said, he did a damn good job. Sarah shook her head. Mark didn't want to vanish. Someone made him. Paul looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. Then that someone's a ghost. He left her with one warning. You keep chasing fog, it might swallow you too. Then he was gone. Sarah stirred her coffee until it went cold. Outside, rain streaked down the window. The reflection of her face blurred in the glass eyes, hollow, but still awake. She whispered, "Then I'll chase it anyway." By the 5th year, people stopped mentioning Mark's name altogether. Black Pine Ridge became a place people avoided after dusk. Old-timers at the bar called it the ridge that keeps what it takes. They told stories after a few drinks. About hunters who vanished there in the 70s. About lights seen moving through the fog. About voices calling from nowhere. Younger men laughed, but none of them hunted alone anymore. Then came a new story. Early winter, 2012. A trucker driving Route 117 claimed he'd seen a man standing by the roadside at dusk, wearing orange, face pale, eyes unfocused, hands clasped like he was waiting. When the driver slowed, the figure stepped backward into fog and disappeared. Locals whispered again. Was it him? Was it Mark? Sarah heard the rumor at the grocery store checkout. She didn't react, just paid for her coffee and drove back toward the ridge. She marked the new sighting on her map. Another red circle. Another maybe. By then, the forest had changed. The storms had carved new paths, and the old logging trails had sunk beneath moss. Still, she walked, sometimes for hours, sometimes just to listen. The forest had a pulse, quiet but steady, like a heartbeat buried under roots, and she could almost feel it watching. The next spring, her daughter tried to stop her. "Mom, it's been years. You can't keep doing this." Sarah smiled faintly. "You don't stop breathing because someone's gone." The daughter didn't argue again. There was no point. Grief had already built a home inside her mother. By 2013, Black Pine Ridge had become local folklore. Kids dared each other to hike near mile marker 71. Campers left offerings, coins, little wooden crosses, beer cans, and on some nights, when the fog rolled down, you could still see a faint glow deep in the trees, like a flashlight beam moving slowly, deliberately. People said it was her, still searching. They weren't wrong. Then came the flood. Spring of 2014 brought record rain. Mudslides tore through the slopes. The county closed the access roads for months. Sarah waited, watched the news. One headline caught her eye. Gray Hollow Creek washout expands search zone. She clipped it, folded it into her map. Another place to check, once the roads reopened. She didn't know it yet, but the flood had already begun to uncover something. Deep below the ridge, in a bend of the creek where the soil turned black, bones were rising. Winter returned again, the 7th since he vanished. Sarah spent Christmas alone, drinking coffee by the window, staring toward the north. She still had his comb in a small zip bag, still kept the thermos he'd never brought back, still checked the batteries in her flashlight every week. Some nights, she'd open the map on the table, run her fingers along the red lines. "Show me," she whispered. The clock ticked. Outside, the wind answered softly. Then, April 2015, a call came to the county dispatch. "Construction crew, Gray Hollow Creek." "Ma'am, we hit something," the foreman said. "Not a pipe, not a root. Feels solid." By the time the sheriff arrived, the site was lit with floodlights. Rain in the air, mud underfoot. The workers had dug down 3 feet. Something pale showed through the dirt. Round, smooth, hollow. One of them said it first. Skull. The word traveled fast. By dusk, yellow tape circled the site. Reporters called from Richmond before midnight. Sheriff Claire Morgan, now in her 2nd term, stood beside the tape, face grim. Could be him, she said. Could finally be Dalton. The forest had been silent for 7 years. Now it had spoken. And what it said would unravel everything they thought they knew about that ridge. Sarah was already on the road before dawn. Rain beat against the windshield. She didn't stop for gas. Didn't blink. When she reached the site, the lights were still on. The mud churned, and the sheriff waited, with a clipboard. Sarah stepped out, soaked and trembling. She handed over the items she'd carried for years. Mark's dental x-rays, and the small plastic bag of hair from his comb. Her voice was steady. "If it's him," she said. "I've been waiting long enough." The sheriff nodded. "Let's find out." The samples were sent to Richmond. Tests would take weeks. Sarah went home, but sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that pale shape in the mud, half covered, half free. The ridge had finally whispered, but she couldn't yet tell if it was mercy or warning. Detective Ryan Hale didn't believe in fate. He believed in patterns, and something in the Dalton file didn't fit. He reopened the case 2 weeks after the Gray Hollow discovery, spreading old reports across his desk like a map of unfinished sentences. The sheriff's office had labeled it unresolved disappearance, but to Hale, it read like a cover-up no one had meant to write. No blood, no tracks, no storm that night strong enough to erase everything. He flipped through Deputy Ramsey's notes again. 3 words underlined twice. Not lost. Something else. It felt like a voice from the past whispering through the paper. He drove back to the ridge alone. The road twisted upward, swallowed by fog. At mile marker 71, he pulled over. The same turnoff, Forest Access 12. Same smell of pine and iron. Same quiet that seemed too complete. Hale stepped out with a topo map, tracing the terrain with his flashlight. That's when he noticed something no one had marked before. A cluster of faint circles on the map, barely visible under decades of pencil lines. Old well sites. Abandoned farm plots. Long before the forest was federal land. He whispered to himself. Harrow property. It was the same name that had shown up once, in an old witness note from a hunter 7 years ago. The man who claimed he'd heard shouting that night. The next morning, Hale went through county records. He found the original land survey from 1956. Harrow Farm. Last inhabited in 1974. Beside the main house was a single well marked stone, depth unknown. When he compared the coordinates, it lined up exactly with the Gray Hollow Creek area where the bones had surfaced. He leaned back in his chair. If someone wanted to hide a body, this was the place. By the weekend, he convinced Sheriff Claire Morgan to authorize a site check. "Just one more look," he said. Morgan hesitated, then nodded. "Take a team, but don't go alone up there." The next day, Hale hiked out with 2 deputies and a local guide named Fletcher. The trail was narrow, swallowed by moss and mist. No one spoke much. By late afternoon, they found what was left of Harroway Farm. Rotting beams, a stone foundation barely visible under weeds, and there a ring of rock, waist-high, slick with moss. A well. Hale crouched beside it. The stones were old, weathered, but the cover wasn't. It wasn't wood. It wasn't the sagging boards you'd expect after 50 years. It was smooth concrete, flat, and new. He brushed away dirt with his glove. No cracks, no moss, no lichen. Just clean gray surface. He knocked on it once. The sound was dense, hollow beneath. He whispered. This wasn't poured in the 50s. Fletcher glanced at him. Then when? Hale looked up. Within the last decade. Back in town, Hale dug through property records again. The land adjacent to Harroway had been owned by one man for over 30 years. Harold Beck, a carpenter who lived 3 miles east. The same name that had shown up in the 2007 complaint log. Land dispute with Mark Dalton. Something about fencing across timberland. Hale's pulse picked up. He checked the case file. The dispute had been dropped a few months before Dalton vanished. He drove out to the Beck property that afternoon. A sagging farmhouse sat behind piles of lumber. A flatbed truck with a mounted crane rested by the shed. Harold Beck opened the door in suspenders and a work shirt. Eyes sharp, jaw clenched. "Detective," he said flatly. "Haven't seen one of you in years." Hale smiled politely. "You do much work with concrete these days?" "Used to," Beck said. "Back's not what it used to be." His tone was steady. Too steady. They talked about hunting season. About storms. About nothing. Then Hale mentioned Harrow Farm. Beck's jaw tightened. "What about it?" Hale looked toward the truck in the yard. "Someone sealed the well there. Fresh concrete. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Beck shrugged. "I mind my own business, detective." "Sure," Hale said. "So did Mark Dalton." The air between them changed. Beck's eyes narrowed. "I didn't touch that man," he said. "Never said you did," Hale replied softly. "But someone went through a lot of effort to make sure no one ever found him." Hale left, but not empty-handed. He noticed 3 concrete slabs behind the workshop, identical in size to the one covering the Harrow well. Each one perfectly smooth. Each one too new. Back at headquarters, the samples came in. Soil residue from Beck's truck bed matched the mineral composition of the well site. Microscopic paint fragments on the slab matched his truck's body paint. And then there was the jacket, an orange hunting jacket, seized during a search of the workshop. Faded, size large, with a dark stain across the chest. DNA confirmed it. The blood belonged to Mark Dalton. Hale closed the file slowly. "Got you," he whispered. When they returned to Beck's house with a warrant, he didn't fight. Didn't even ask why. In the interrogation room, the rain drummed against the glass. Beck sat silent for hours, hands folded, eyes locked on the table. Finally, Hale placed the evidence on the desk. A photo of the slab, a cast of the tire tracks, and the jacket. Beck's hands trembled. He whispered, "You don't understand." "Then make me," Hale said. The confession came out in fragments. The night of November 27th, 2007. Mark had driven up to confront him about the property line again. They argued. Words turned to shoves. Beck reached for a knife on the workbench. "He grabbed my arm," Beck said, voice shaking. "I swung. I didn't mean." He trailed off. Mark fell. Hit the floor hard. Didn't move. Beck froze. Then panic took over. He tied Mark's hands, not knowing what else to do. "I just needed to hide him," he said. "I thought I'd fix it later." That night, Beck called his nephew, Luke, a part-time laborer. Told him he needed help hauling scrap to the old Harrow well. Luke didn't ask questions. They drove through the forest roads under moonlight, loaded the bundle, still wrapped in a tarp, onto the flatbed. The forest was silent. When they reached the well, Luke turned on the floodlight. The circle of stone glowed in the dark like a wound. Beck tied a rope around the bundle. Luke hesitated. "It looks like a body," he said. "Don't say that," Beck snapped. They lowered it slowly. A single thud echoed from below. And then silence. "I thought it was done," Beck said quietly. "I thought it would stay buried." A week later, guilt pulled him back. He poured a new concrete slab, using the same crane he used for his woodworking jobs. When Hale asked why, Beck's voice cracked. "I didn't want animals getting in," he said. Then after a pause, "or anything getting out." The room went still. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan. By the time Beck finished his story, dawn had broken outside. Rain had stopped. Hale leaned back, exhausted. "You could have confessed any time these last 7 years," he said. Beck stared at the wall. "I knew the day they found the skull. The forest told me it was over." He pressed his palms to his eyes. "I haven't slept since that night." The next day, deputies arrested Luke Beck for assisting after the fact. He came in quietly, eyes hollow, told them about the drive, the smell of metal, the sound of the rope slipping. "I didn't know what was under the tarp," he said. "I swear, I didn't. I can't." He cried when they showed him the photo of the well. Every detail matched. The tire tracks, the cable coil found in the creek nearby, the fragments of denim tangled in rusted wire. The ridge had given it all back. That night, Hale drove back up to Harrow Farm. The forest was wet, breathing mist. He stood by the well, flashlight in hand. The concrete slab had been lifted now, the hole open and silent. He leaned over the edge, staring into the dark. 7 years, he murmured. Rain started again, soft against his coat. He closed his eyes and listened. For the first time, the ridge sounded at peace. But deep inside, he knew. The forest never really forgets. It just waits for someone to listen. Morning broke gray over Ashwell County. The courthouse sat silent under drizzle, its stone steps slick with rain. Inside, the case of State v. Harold Beck filled every seat. Reporters lined the back rows. Locals leaned forward in the benches, waiting for the story they'd whispered about for years. The man who buried the forest's secret was finally going to speak in daylight. Harold Beck walked in wearing a wrinkled gray shirt, hands cuffed, eyes down. His face looked smaller than the one in the newspapers. Detective Ryan Hale sat behind the prosecutor, arms crossed. He'd heard the confession a dozen times, but hearing it again in court still made his stomach twist. The prosecutor opened with the photo of the well. Concrete slab, mud, rope. The same image that had haunted Hale's desk for months. "This," she said, "is what the forest gave back." The jury stared in silence. A hum of air conditioning filled the pause between sentences. She outlined the story piece by piece. The fight, the cover-up, the pouring of the slab. The evidence was cold, methodical, impossible to deny. When she finished, you could hear the rain tapping against the glass again. Beck's attorney called him to the stand. The man's voice cracked before he said a word. He talked about the argument, the panic, the rope. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said quietly. "I just wanted him off my land." He looked toward the jury, searching for something that wasn't there. Then came the question everyone waited for. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Beck blinked slowly. "Because I thought I could live with it." He paused, his hands shaking. "I was wrong." In the second row, Sarah Dalton sat motionless. A black coat, folded hands. On her lap, a photograph of Mark smiling beside his red truck. She didn't look at Beck. Not once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the photo, as if holding her husband in place. When she was called to testify, the room went completely still. Even the reporters stopped writing. Sarah stood, the photo still in her hands. She walked to the witness stand slowly, each step echoing in the quiet courtroom. "Mrs. Dalton," the prosecutor said softly, "can you tell the jury what kind of man your husband was?" Sarah looked up. "Steady," she said. "Patient. The kind who fixed everything except other people's anger." She turned toward Beck, and her voice didn't waver. "He trusted people, even when he shouldn't have." Beck looked down, tears slipping onto his cuffed hands. When Sarah left the stand, Hale saw her exhale for the first time in years. It wasn't relief. It was release. Like a door finally opening after 7 winters. The trial stretched 2 weeks. Testimonies from forensic experts, from Luke Beck, from Hale himself. Luke admitted to helping his uncle that night, thinking it was just scrap metal. When he realized it wasn't, he said the sound of the thud never left his ears. He cried openly. The courtroom didn't. Closing arguments came on a stormy afternoon. Thunder rolled behind the courthouse windows. The prosecutor's voice cut through it clean. "Harold Beck didn't just bury a man," she said. "He buried truth. He poured concrete over it. But truth doesn't stay buried forever, not here, not anywhere." The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. When they returned, no one breathed. "Guilty," the foreman said. On all counts. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was quiet, heavy, final, like the forest itself, taking a breath. Beck was sentenced to life without parole. Luke received 5 years for aiding after the fact. Neither resisted, neither spoke. Reporters rushed to file their stories. The Cold Ridge murder solved. The forest that wouldn't forget. But Hale didn't stay for the press conference. He stepped outside, under the gray sky, and let the rain hit his face until the noise of the courthouse disappeared. Weeks passed. The evidence was sealed in storage. The rope, the jacket, the rusted Seiko watch. Each tagged, numbered, archived. Hale kept one photo pinned to his corkboard. The one taken just before they lifted the concrete slab. The forest around it blurred by rain. The ridge, quiet, holding its breath. He told himself he'd take it down after the sentencing. He never did. Sarah buried Mark on a Thursday. Small service. No cameras. No speeches. Just family, a few neighbors, and Hale standing at a distance. The rain had stopped by then, but the ground was soft and black. Sarah placed Mark's old hunting knife beside the headstone. "Home," she whispered. "You're home now." Her voice barely carried, but Hale heard it. Everyone did. After the burial, Sarah invited Hale to the house. It was quiet inside, the walls lined with old maps and photographs of the ridge. She poured him coffee, then opened a small box on the table. Inside was a folded map marked with red lines. "This was everything I searched," she said. He unfolded it carefully. Nearly every trail was marked, circled, or crossed out. Only one line remained open. A thin red path leading back to Haraway Farm. "You were right," Hale said. Sarah smiled faintly. "No. The forest was." Months later, she she launched something new, a non-profit called Project Aegis. Its goal, to help search for people who vanished in Appalachian wilderness. The first case file on record carried one name, Mark Dalton. Local volunteers joined. Sheriff Morgan approved funding. Even Hale signed on as an advisor. At the dedication ceremony, Sarah stood under the same sky that had once poured rain on the well. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about remembering. Because forgetting is how we lose them twice." Summer came again to Black Pine Ridge. The forest regrew where the crime scene had been. Moss covered the old stone foundation of Haraway Farm. Wildflowers bloomed around the fenced well. The county placed a sign nearby. Historical investigation site no entry. Most hikers avoided it. But sometimes, near dusk, drivers on Route 117 said they saw a figure standing by the fence line. Not threatening, just still. A woman in a dark coat, watching the trees sway. They said she carried a map. Some said it was Sarah. Some said it wasn't. Hale returned once more that autumn. The ridge was quiet, the air sharp with pine. He parked at the same clearing where Mark's truck once sat. He walked slowly to the edge of the well. The concrete had been replaced with a steel grate, secured and numbered by the county. He crouched down, listened to the wind funneling through the hollow below. It sounded almost like breathing. "Rest easy," he murmured. Then he stood, and the forest answered with a single echo, a faint metallic knock, like the ticking of a stopped watch. That night, Hale drove back through Millfield. Lights flickered in diner windows, rain starting again on the pavement. He passed Sarah's house. Her porch light glowed through the fog. In the window, he could see her silhouette. Still, peaceful, bent over the same map, marking new paths for people she'd never met. He smiled faintly. Not sadness, not relief, just quiet understanding. Before heading home, Hale stopped by the sheriff's office one last time. He filed his final note into the Dalton case. A single line, written in his neat handwriting. "The forest never forgets. It just waits for us to listen." He closed the file, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, the ridge behind him slept without secrets.